The rain lashed against the windows of Magnolia House restaurant, creating a watery veil that distorted the city lights. Grace adjusted the white bow of her black and white uniform, trying to ignore the pain in her feet after 8 hours of standing. Her delicate face, framed by black hair pulled back in a severe bun, showed signs of fatigue that she tried to disguise with a rehearsed smile. At 24, she carried in her dark brown eyes a maturity acquired through daily sacrifices. The restaurant was one of the most exclusive in the city, frequented only by the elite who could afford exorbitant prices for dishes with French names that Grace could barely pronounce. She observed her reflection in the golden mirror of the main hall, mechanically adjusting the starched collar that irritated her skin. If my mother could see me now, serving people who spend in one night what I earn in a month, thought Grace with a resigned sigh. But I do this for you, Abuela, until your treatment is over. The maître de Robert, a thin man with small vigilant eyes, approached with silent steps across the red carpet. His rigid face rarely showed emotions, but his whispered voice always carried a tone of veiled threat. He adjusted his bow tie with bony fingers and leaned toward Grace, his mint breath not completely disguising the smell of the cigarette he had smoked minutes earlier at the back entrance. "Table 8, Grace. William's family has arrived. Behave impeccably or look for another job," he hissed, handing her leather-bound menus. "They're the most important customers we have. One misstep, and you'll be on the street before you can even say sorry." Grace swallowed hard, holding the heavy menus against her chest. William wasn't just a name, he was an institution, an empire built on properties, investments, and political influence. Rumors about his family circulated among staff like valuable coins of information. He had been a widower for many years. It was said he had never fully recovered from the loss. His mother, Charlotte, was known for her authoritarian temperament and the control she still maintained over the family business at 70. And wherever William went, his niece Madison appeared, a spoiled young woman who seemed intent on making waiters' lives hell. "Understood, Mr. Robert. I will personally ensure that everything is perfect," Grace responded, blending submission and dignity in the exact measure she had learned to dose in that environment. "I won't disappoint you." The main hall of Magnolia House was a cathedral dedicated to ostentation. Crystal chandeliers hung from the high ceiling, pouring golden light over tables covered with Egyptian linen cloths. Silver cutlery gleamed on starched napkins, and arrangements of rare orchids decorated each table. Grace navigated this space with the grace of someone who had learned to become almost invisible, an essential skill for a waitress serving people accustomed to not noticing those who served them. She approached table 8, located near the large window that offered a view of the illuminated gardens, now lashed by the merciless rain. William was taller than he appeared in business magazine photographs. At 50, he maintained an upright posture that matched his penetrating and attentive gaze. Grey hair at his temples gave him an air of distinction that matched his impeccably tailored suit. To his left, like a permanent shadow, was Charlotte, small in stature but colossal in presence. Her white hair was arranged in a perfect bun, adorned with an antique silver comb. Family jewels sparkled on her neck and wrists, silent witnesses to generations of accumulated wealth. Madison, seated at her uncle's right, couldn't have been more than 25. Her beauty was of the aggressive type, enhanced by expensive makeup and jewelry, too ostentatious for someone so young. Her red dress seemed to scream for attention amid the restaurant's sober decor. "Good evening. Welcome to Magnolia House. I'm Grace, and I'll be taking care of your table tonight," she said in a clear, polite voice, distributing the menus with precise movements. "Our chef's suggestion for today is duck with pomegranate sauce and black truffles." "About time," Madison commented without raising her eyes from her phone. "We've been sitting for almost 5 minutes. In Paris, we would have been served 3 times by now." The rain intensified outside, a rhythmic drumming against the windows that created a strange soundtrack to the tension Grace felt growing within herself. She remained impassive in the face of the provocation, maintaining the professional smile she had perfected in her 2 years working there. William cast a disapproving look at his niece, but said nothing as he examined the menu with deliberate attention. Charlotte studied Grace over her reading glasses, hanging on a gold chain. Her eyes narrowed as if assessing a potentially flawed piece of furniture. "I suppose you've memorized the wines as well? Or do we need the sommelier?" asked Charlotte in a tone that suggested she already knew the answer. William prefers Bordeaux, but only specific vintages. Certainly, ma'am. We have the Chateau Margaux 2010 that pairs perfectly with the duck. Or I can call our sommelier Etienne for more specific recommendations, Grace replied, maintaining her composure. He personally knows the producers of all our French wines. William's niece finally deigned to look at Grace, a malicious smile forming on her red-painted lips. There was something predatory in her gaze, as if looking for a weakness, a crack in the waitress's professional armor. Madison adjusted herself in her chair, leaning slightly forward, her long brown hair falling like a silk curtain over one shoulder. Grace felt a shiver of apprehension run down her spine. She knew this type of customer well, the type who found pleasure in humiliating those who couldn't retaliate. Uncle William, don't you find it fascinating how these people memorize these things? Madison commented, with false admiration. Here it's almost as if they went to university for this, isn't it? Learning to serve. William frowned, visibly bothered by his niece's comment. Madison, please, choose your dish, he said, in a low but firm voice before addressing Grace. Bring the sommelier, please, and I apologize for my niece's behavior. She is still learning that money and education are not necessarily companions. The order was efficiently taken after consulting the sommelier, a middle-aged Frenchman who treated William's family with the deference reserved for royalty. Grace moved through the dining room with the grace of someone who knew every inch of the space, every routine, every expectation. While serving the appetizer, an elaborate composition of foie gras with port wine reduction, she couldn't help but notice how William seemed distant, his eyes occasionally getting lost in the storm outside, as if searching for something beyond the rain and darkness. There was a melancholy in him that contrasted with his niece's arrogance and his mother's calculated rigidity. "Are you enjoying the appetizer, sir?" Grace asked, noticing he had barely touched his plate. "I can request something different if you prefer." "It's delicious, I'm just distracted today," William replied with a tired smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Sometimes the past has a peculiar way of weighing more than the present, don't you think?" The night advanced, and the restaurant began to empty, keeping only the tables occupied by customers who appreciated long dinners and prolonged conversations. William's family was having dessert when the incident happened. Grace was serving the chocolate soufflé with vanilla cream when Madison, in a movement that seemed too casual to be accidental, stretched her arm to grab her wine glass. Her elbow hit the Bordeaux bottle, spilling the ruby liquid directly onto Grace's white uniform. The wine spread like a bloodstain over the immaculate fabric, dripping onto the expensive carpet. The silence that followed was broken only by the muffled sound of rain and Madison's restrained laughter. "How clumsy you are," Madison said, feigning concern, while other customers turned to observe the spectacle. "Perhaps you should look for another type of work, one that doesn't require so much, coordination." "Enough, Madison," William's voice thundered, surprising everyone at the table. His usually composed face now showed contained anger. "Apologize immediately." Grace trembled slightly, not because of the stain on her uniform. It wasn't the first time this had happened, but because of the public humiliation, the looks of pity or disdain from other customers, the certainty that Robert would be calculating the cost of the wasted wine to deduct from her already insufficient salary. Her thoughts flew to her grandmother, sick at home, depending on the medicines that Grace's salary could barely pay for. She felt her eyes burn with contained tears, but refused to give Madison the satisfaction of seeing her cry. "It's all right, sir," Grace responded with dignity. "Accidents happen. I request permission to withdraw for a moment and clean myself." The maître was already approaching, his face a mask of barely disguised disapproval, when William abruptly stood up. To everyone's surprise, he took the handkerchief from his jacket pocket and began to wipe the wine from Grace's uniform, a gesture so unexpected that it paralyzed everyone around. Even Madison seemed astonished by her uncle's attitude. Charlotte observed the scene with eyes that mixed disbelief and something close to dread, as if William were violating some sacred code by touching an employee. "Bring the bill and a clean uniform for this young woman," William ordered the maitre d', leaving no room for discussion. "And the wine my niece wasted will be charged to her, not to the employee." Robert stammered an agreement and quickly moved away. Charlotte adjusted the pearls on her neck, a nervous habit that contrasted with her normally unshakable posture. Madison looked at her uncle as if he had suddenly gone mad, all arrogance replaced by genuine confusion. William returned to his chair and took his wallet from the inside pocket of his jacket to pay the bill that Robert promptly brought. That's when it happened. The wallet slipped from his hands, falling open on the floor. Grace automatically bent down to pick it up, a deeply rooted service reflex. "Thank you, but I don't need," William began to say, but his voice disappeared when he saw the expression on Grace's face. The waitress was paralyzed, her fingers touching a small photograph that had escaped from the wallet. The image showed a young woman smiling at the camera, her face radiant with carefree happiness frozen in time. The black, wavy hair framed eyes identical to Grace's, not just similar, but exactly the same. It was like looking at a mirror that showed a happier, younger version of herself, but it wasn't her. Grace knew that face, that smile, those eyes. She had seen them every day of her life until 5 years ago. "Why do you have a photo of my mother in your wallet?" The question escaped in a strangled whisper, laden with disbelief and confusion. Time seemed to freeze at Magnolia House. The few remaining customers, previously entertained with their own conversations, now watched the scene with poorly disguised curiosity. The waiters stopped halfway to the tables, trays suspended in the air as if in a photograph. William visibly paled, his face assuming an almost ghostly tone under the golden lights of the restaurant. His eyes, previously distant, were now completely focused on Grace, studying every detail of her face as if seeing it for the first time. Charlotte gripped the edge of the table so tightly that her knuckles turned white, her body rigid, as if she had been transformed into stone. "Your mother?" William's voice came out strangled, almost unrecognizable. "This woman in the photo, Rachel, was your mother?" Grace nodded slowly, unable to form words, a strange buzzing filling her ears. The world around began to distort, the restaurant lights becoming strangely bright and then darkening at the edges of her vision. She felt her legs weaken, the floor beneath her feet suddenly unstable. The last thing she registered was the sharp sound of a scream, perhaps from Madison, perhaps from some customer, and then darkness swallowed her completely, her body collapsing onto the crimson carpet of Magnolia House. The confusion that followed was immediate. Customers stood up, employees rushed over. Alarmed voices mixed in a cacophony of concern and morbid curiosity. William reacted with surprising quickness for a man of his age and position, kneeling beside Grace and checking her pulse with the competence of someone who had faced emergencies before. His face, moments before pale with shock, was now flushed with an almost fierce determination. Rachel's photo had fallen on the floor beside them, a silent witness to the collision of two worlds that should never have met. "She's breathing, just fainted," announced William, his voice regaining its usual authority. "Give her space, please." Robert approached nervously, balancing between concern for an employee and the embarrassment caused to his most important customers. "Mr. William, we've already called an ambulance. I apologize 1,000 times for this terrible incident." "I assure you that." "Cancel the ambulance," interrupted William, in a tone that admitted no discussion. "I'll take her to the hospital personally in my car." A murmur of surprise ran through the room. Charlotte finally regained mobility, rising with the help of her silver cane. Her face, normally a mask of aristocratic composure, now betrayed barely contained panic. She approached her son and held his arm with surprising strength for a woman of her age. "William, don't be absurd," she hissed with urgency. "Let the restaurant handle this situation. We have commitments, remember?" The meeting with investors early tomorrow. William looked at his mother as if seeing her for the first time, something new and disturbing in his gaze. Without replying, he leaned over and took Grace in his arms, lifting her from the floor with reverent care. The waitress looked small and vulnerable in his arms, her pale face contrasting with the wine-stained uniform. Madison watched the scene with her mouth slightly open, all pretense abandoned in the face of her uncle's incomprehensible behavior. She exchanged an alarmed look with her grandmother, who now seemed to have aged 10 years in 10 minutes. "My driver is at the entrance," William told the maitre d', completely ignoring his mother's protests. "Clear the way, please." Charlotte moved with surprising agility, positioning herself between William and the restaurant exit. Her eyes, normally cold and calculating, now shone with a rarely seen emotion, fear. She grabbed her son's arm again, her perfectly manicured nails digging into the expensive fabric of his suit. "William, don't make this mistake." Her voice vibrated with desperate urgency. "Don't let a simple waitress destroy everything we've built." The look William cast at his mother contained decades of unexpressed emotions. There was anger, yes, but also sadness, disappointment, and something that dangerously resembled a revelation. When he spoke, his voice was low but charged with a relentless determination that silenced not just Charlotte, but everyone around. "I need to know the truth, Mother," he said, the words heavy as stones. "I need to find out if Rachel—" The words died on his lips, but the impact was visible on Charlotte's face. The matriarch paled, clutching her cane as if it were her last support in a suddenly unstable world. Her gaze, now averted from her son, revealed the panic of someone who sees a carefully guarded secret of decades on the verge of exposure. The air between mother and son seemed electrified, charged with unspoken truths and lies sustained for too long. William proceeded toward the exit, carrying Grace with unwavering determination. The rain continued outside, now transformed into a merciless storm, as if nature itself was responding to the drama unfolding inside Magnolia House. Staff and customers made way, hypnotized by the sight of the powerful William carrying a simple waitress as if she were the most precious cargo in the world. At the restaurant entrance, the driver was already waiting with the black limousine door open, rain ricocheting off the umbrella he held. "To the mansion immediately," William ordered, carefully settling Grace in the back seat before entering beside her. As the luxury vehicle moved away from the restaurant, tearing through the curtain of rain with its powerful headlights, Charlotte remained at the entrance watching. Her face, now exposed to the harsh light of lightning, revealed what few people had ever seen: the genuine fear of a woman who had dedicated her life to controlling all variables, only to see her careful arrangement crumble with a simple question: "Why do you have a picture of my mother in your wallet?" The limousine glided silently through the soaked streets, the windshield wipers fighting against the merciless storm. In the back seat, William observed Grace's unconscious face, noticing for the first time the details that had escaped his gaze at the restaurant. The shape of her lips, the design of her eyebrows, the contour of her chin, everything reminded him of Rachel with painful precision. The resemblance was more than coincidence. It was as if the past had come to life again, materialized in the form of this unknown young woman. His hands held the photo that had triggered everything. The small worn portrait he had carried like a talisman for 25 years, a reminder of a love he believed lost forever. "How did I never see her before?" William murmured, tracing with his eyes every feature of Grace's face. "All these years and you were so close, practically before my eyes." The mansion emerged through the curtain of rain, an imposing construction of stone and glass, surrounded by meticulously planned gardens that now bent under the weight of the storm. Golden lights shone through the tall windows, creating the illusion of a beacon amid the darkness. The driver parked under the marquee of the main entrance, where a butler was already waiting with an umbrella. The man showed no surprise at seeing his master carrying an unconscious woman. Years of service to the family had taught discretion above all. William refused help with a silent gesture, preferring to carry Grace personally into the mansion. "Prepare the library," William ordered, his voice echoing in the monumental entrance hall, where marble sculptures silently observed the unusual scene. "And bring tea when she wakes up. I don't want to be disturbed, understood? By anyone." The butler nodded with a discreet bow and quickly walked away, while William climbed the wide marble staircase with Grace in his arms. The library occupied the entire east wing of the second floor, a personal sanctuary where William spent most of his time when he was at home. Walls lined with books from floor to ceiling, some first editions as valuable as works of art, all meticulously organized. A stone fireplace dominated one of the walls, the fire crackling softly, casting dancing shadows over the antique furniture and Persian rugs. Carefully he settled Grace on a Chesterfield leather sofa near the fire, placing a silk cushion under her head. "Who are you really?" he whispered, adjusting a lock of hair that had fallen across the young woman's face. "And what did Rachel never tell me?" The butler returned with a silver tray containing a porcelain teapot and 2 cups, which he silently arranged on a side table before withdrawing. William remained standing, restless, alternating between observing Grace and walking to the tall windows, where the storm continued to punish the gardens. His mind was a whirlwind of questions and theories, each more disturbing than the last. Something inside him knew the answer even before confirming it. The evidence was written on Grace's face, in the genuine disbelief in her voice when she recognized the photo, in the absolute terror in his mother's eyes when the scene unfolded at the restaurant. 25 years of lies, he muttered to himself, his fist involuntarily clenching. Why, Mother, what did you do? A soft moan caught his attention. Grace was beginning to awaken, her eyes opening slowly, confused. For a moment, she seemed disoriented, her gaze wandering around the unfamiliar environment, the high ceilings with golden moldings, the shelves filled with leather-bound books, the Dutch masters' paintings on the walls. Then her gaze met William's, and memory seemed to return all at once. She sat up abruptly, her hand instinctively seeking support on the soft sofa. "Where am I? What happened?" Grace asked, her trembling voice betraying the fear she was trying to control. "Why did you bring me here?" William approached slowly, like someone afraid of startling a wild animal, and sat in an armchair across from her. Between them, on the mahogany coffee table, he placed the photograph that had triggered everything. The silence in the library was almost palpable, broken only by the crackling of the fire and the distant sound of rain against the windows. After what seemed like an eternity, he finally spoke, his voice controlled but laden with emotion. "You're in my house, Grace. You fainted at the restaurant after seeing this photo," he explained, indicating the image on the table. "I think we have a lot to talk about. Would you like some tea? You've had quite a shock." Grace accepted the cup with trembling hands, the steam rising in spirals before her pale face. She took a small sip, the warmth of the liquid restoring a bit of color to her cheeks. Her eyes, however, didn't leave the photograph for even a second. There were so many questions in her gaze that William hardly knew where to begin. He observed her reaction carefully, noting every small gesture, every expression that passed across her face. "This woman in the photo," he finally began, indicating the image, "was Rachel your mother? Am I right?" "Yes," Grace replied, her voice barely more than a whisper. "Rachel was my mother. She passed away 5 years ago. Cancer. But I don't understand how you knew her, or why you carry a photo of her." William took a deep breath, as if gathering strength for a difficult confession. He rose from his armchair and walked to one of the bookshelves, revealing a secret compartment behind a row of books. From there, he retrieved a small carved wooden box that he brought back to the table. He opened it with reverent care, revealing letters yellowed by time, more photographs, and a small ring with a green stone. "Rachel Ramirez was the great love of my life," he finally revealed, his voice choked with emotion. "We met 25 years ago when she worked as a seamstress in the atelier that supplied clothes for our family. I had just returned from my studies abroad. It was," he hesitated, searching for the right word, "immediate, as if we had known each other in another life." "That's impossible," Grace murmured, unable to reconcile the idea of the powerful William being in love with her humble mother. "She never mentioned, never said anything about you." William continued, the words now flowing like a dam that finally breaks. He told how they fell in love, planned to run away together against his family's wishes, especially his mother's. How they bought wedding rings, the same one with the green stone that he now showed to Grace. How they set the date to begin a new life, away from social impositions and expectations of William's family. And then Rachel's sudden disappearance, without explanations, without a goodbye. Just a cold letter delivered by intermediaries saying she had found another man, that their love had been a mistake. "I searched for her for months," William confessed, running his hand through his grey hair with a gesture of frustration. "I hired investigators, scoured the city. Eventually, my mother convinced me to accept that Rachel had betrayed me, that it was better to forget her. I married the woman my family chose, lived as expected, but I never forgot your mother. She always told me my father had died before I was born," revealed Grace, silent tears now streaming down her face. "She never talked much about him, only that he had been a good man who had loved her very much. I'm only 24, which means..." Some misunderstanding hit them simultaneously. A truth that now seemed so obvious, It was painful to consider they had spent so much time without realizing it. William stared fixedly at Grace, now seeing not just Rachel but also himself reflected in her features. The shape of her eyes, the nose, the way she slightly tilted her head when focused. They were his gestures, his heritage. "You were born 8 months after Rachel disappeared," he calculated aloud, the realization making his voice tremble. "She was pregnant when she vanished. You are your daughter," Grace completed, her voice a mixture of incredulity and revelation. "But why did she never tell? Why lie about you being dead?" The library door opened abruptly, interrupting the moment of revelation. Charlotte entered like a storm, supported by her silver cane, followed by a middle-aged man wearing an impeccable suit and carrying a medical bag. Her face, normally a mask of aristocratic self-control, was now contorted by a mixture of fury and panic. Her eyes moved quickly from the memory box on the table to the emotional expressions of William and Grace. "What do you think you're doing, William?" Charlotte demanded, her voice sharp as steel. "Bringing this waitress to our home? Exposing our family this way? And reviving that ridiculous story after so many years?" William rose slowly, his posture visibly changing. For the first time, Grace saw in him not just the emotional man of moments before, but the powerful magnate who commanded an empire. There was an authority in his gaze that made even Charlotte momentarily hesitate. When he spoke, his voice was low, but charged with an intensity that seemed to fill the entire library. "This waitress has a name, Mother. It's Grace. And I believe she is my daughter with Rachel, your granddaughter." The doctor, who until then had remained discreetly behind Charlotte, stepped forward with a professional smile that didn't reach his calculating eyes. He was a man of sharp features, grey hair meticulously combed back, and studiedly smooth gestures. There was something about his presence that made Grace feel an involuntary shiver, an instinctive sensation of danger she couldn't explain. "William, your mother is concerned about your health, understandably," the doctor intervened, his voice smooth as velvet. "This unexpected encounter has clearly affected you. The young lady is probably confused as well. I've been the family doctor for decades. Allow me to examine you, ensure you're well after the fainting spell." "William, this girl is obviously confused or trying to deceive us," declared Charlotte, approaching the table to examine Rachel's photo with evident contempt. "She probably saw Rachel's picture in some old magazine about our family. You know how these people are, always looking for opportunities, inventing stories to get close to families like ours." Grace felt her blood boil at the unfair accusation. All the confusion and vulnerability of the previous minutes were replaced by an indignation she couldn't contain. She rose from the sofa with dignity, facing Charlotte's icy gaze without hesitation. "I never asked anything of your son, ma'am," she stated firmly. "Until an hour ago, I didn't even know he existed. It was fate that put us face to face in that restaurant. I didn't come after money or position. I just want to understand why my mother lied about my father all these years." William observed the confrontation with growing admiration for Grace's spirit. There was a strength in her that reminded him so much of Rachel, that same unwavering dignity that had captivated him so many years ago. One more confirmation, if he still needed it, of who she really was. His attention, however, soon turned to his mother, whose reaction to Grace's firmness seemed disproportionate. There was something in Charlotte's poorly disguised panic that aroused his suspicions. "What happened 25 years ago, Mother?" William asked, his voice calm but relentless. "Why did Rachel disappear without a trace? I've always accepted your explanation that she abandoned me for another man, but now—" His eyes fixed on Grace, absorbing again the unmistakable similarity in her gaze. Those same eyes that had bewitched him in Rachel, now watching him with the same intensity, the same depth. The truth that had formed in his heart was now undeniable. "Now I'm not so sure," he completed, his voice firm. "In fact, I'm almost certain you've lied to me all these years." Charlotte visibly staggered before her son's direct accusation, dramatically bringing her hand to her chest, as if his words had been a physical blow. The doctor rushed to support her, guiding her to a nearby armchair. The matriarch seemed to have aged 10 years in 10 minutes, her proud posture now bent under the weight of confrontation. "How can you doubt your own mother?" Charlotte moaned, tears welling in her eyes. "After all I've sacrificed for you since your father's death, these accusations will kill me. Doctor, my heart, The doctor immediately opened his bag, removing a stethoscope and a small bottle of medication. Grace observed the scene with growing suspicion. Noticing the exchange of glances between Charlotte and the doctor, there was a disturbing complicity there that went beyond the doctor-patient relationship. While everyone was focused on Charlotte's apparent collapse, the doctor discreetly pointed Grace to a glass of water on the side table. "Miss, please drink some water," he suggested with false solicitude. "It will help calm your nerves after so many emotions." William, however, was no longer willing to be distracted by his mother's dramatic scenes. Years of managing a business empire had sharpened his ability to detect manipulation. He positioned himself in front of Charlotte, arms crossed and expression resolute. "I will discover the truth, Mother," he declared with determination in his eyes. "If Rachel had a daughter, if I have an heiress, nothing will stop me from acknowledging her. Tomorrow I'll request a paternity test and hire the best investigators to find out exactly what happened 25 years ago." Grace watched the scene with growing understanding, the pieces of the puzzle slowly fitting together in her mind. Why would her mother, always so honest in everything, lie about something as fundamental as the identity of her father? What kind of threat or pressure could have forced Rachel to disappear, raise a daughter alone in poverty, when she had clearly been loved by a powerful and wealthy man? The glances exchanged between Charlotte and the doctor seemed to contain the answer. "Miss, you really should drink some," the doctor insisted, now extending the glass of water directly to her. "You look very pale." While William continued his confrontation with Charlotte, Grace noticed something disturbing, a small white residue at the bottom of the glass the doctor was offering her. Her instinct sounded all alarms. With a deliberately careless movement, she pretended to accept the glass only to accidentally drop it on the Persian rug. "Oh, I'm sorry," she murmured, carefully observing the barely disguised expression of frustration on the doctor's face. As William helped Grace clean up the spilled water, Charlotte took advantage of the distraction to urgently whisper to the doctor, her voice too low for others to hear, but not for Grace's attentive ears, who had purposely crouched closer. "He cannot find out what we did. Take care of the girl, like we took care of her mother." The doctor nodded discreetly, his calculating eyes already planning his next move, while offering Grace another glass of water, this one taken directly from a bottle on the center table. The smile on his face was professional, but his eyes were cold as ice. Night advanced silently over the mansion as Grace tried to process everything she had discovered in the last few hours. Accommodated in a guest room as luxurious as a presidential hotel suite, she watched the storm that continued to batter the windows, reflecting the emotional storm she felt inside. William had insisted she spend the night there, promising that in the morning they would continue their conversation and begin investigating what really happened to Rachel. The room, decorated with antique furniture and fine fabrics, seemed like something out of a period film. The canopy bed with silk curtains, the Venetian mirror, the Persian rugs under her bare feet. So different from the small apartment she shared with her sick grandmother, where the thin walls could barely contain the noise from the neighbors and the dampness formed stains on the ceiling during heavy rains. Grace sat on the edge of the bed, exhausted but unable to sleep, trying to reconcile the image of the powerful William with the idea that he could be her father. "How my life has completely changed in just a few hours," she whispered to herself, touching the worn photo of her mother that William had given her. "Why did you hide this from me, Mama? What scared you so much that you would lie to your own daughter?" The silence of dawn was interrupted by voices in the hallway, close to her bedroom door. Grace approached silently, immediately recognizing the voices of the doctor and Charlotte. They seemed to be discussing in urgent tones, not realizing they could be heard. Pressing her ear against the ornate wooden door, Grace managed to catch fragments of the conversation that made her blood freeze in her veins. The doctor's voice sounded concerned yet clinical, as if discussing a particularly challenging diagnosis. "The blood tests I secretly ordered confirm everything, Charlotte. The girl is William's daughter, there's no doubt," the doctor stated with relentless certainty. "The blood type, the preliminary genetic markers, everything matches. The documents we forged 25 years ago won't serve anymore. If William insists on a complete paternity test, the truth will come out." "This cannot happen, Doctor," Charlotte replied, her voice trembling with anger and fear. "You know what we sacrificed to keep William away from that woman. The empire we built together, the family's reputation, everything will be at risk if this waitress is recognized as an heir. We need to act quickly before William becomes certain. A chill ran down Grace's spine as she heard the doctor respond in a low, calculating tone, almost inaudible. It wouldn't be the first time we've resolved a problem of this nature. At your advanced age, Charlotte, it would be unwise to be directly involved. Leave it to me. Accidents happen every day. Grace backed away from the door, her hand covering her mouth to muffle the sound of her accelerated breathing. The implications of the conversation were too clear to be ignored. The same duo that had forced her mother to disappear was now planning to resolve the problem she represented. Images of her mother in her final days came to her mind. Rachel, consumed by cancer, trying to tell her something important, but always hesitating at the last moment. Had this been the truth she could never reveal? Grace looked around the luxurious room, which now seemed more like a golden prison than a refuge. The decision formed in her mind with crystal clarity. She needed to leave immediately. If what I heard is true, my own life is in danger in this house, she thought, her heart beating erratically. Mama, now I understand why you ran away. You were protecting me from them. With silent and quick movements, Grace gathered her few belongings, her purse, the uniform still stained with wine, the photograph of her mother. She put on her coat over the borrowed nightgown that Charlotte had sent for her, refusing to take anything that belonged to that house. Through the window, she saw that the storm had diminished to a constant but weaker rain. The immaculate garden and ornate gates seemed insurmountable, but Grace had grown up in neighborhoods where learning to escape dangerous situations was a survival skill. She observed the movement of security guards patrolling the property, studying their patterns, as she had done so many times when avoiding dangerous streets on her way home. A gap in security appeared when one of the guards entered a small cabin to shelter from the rain. It was now or never. I can't face William now. I need to understand everything first and protect my grandmother, she murmured, as she wrote a brief note that she would leave on the bed. If he really is my father and his intentions are sincere, he will understand why I fled. In the note, written on mansion stationery, Grace thanked them for the hospitality but explained that she needed to return to care for her sick grandmother, promising to contact them when things calmed down. It was a half-truth, enough to buy time without raising immediate suspicions. With silent steps, she opened the door and peered into the hallway. The voices of Charlotte and the doctor had faded away. They had probably retreated to the office or to the matriarch's bedroom. The only sound was the rhythmic ticking of an antique clock at the end of the corridor, marking 3 o'clock in the morning. Grace remembered William mentioning he would leave early to resolve urgent matters related to his business. With luck, she would have a few hours' advantage before her absence was noticed. If I can reach the hospital before dawn, I can see how Abuela is doing and then decide where to go, she planned, silently descending the grand staircase, keeping to the shadows. Perhaps my restaurant supervisor can help me find a temporary place. The rain welcomed Grace like a cold embrace when she finally managed to escape through the back of the mansion, using a service door she had noticed earlier. The garden, even under the night rain, was a labyrinth of planned beauty, geometrically perfect flower beds, marble statues silently observing her escape, ornate fountains now overflowing with stormwater. She skirted the garden lighting, keeping to the shadows of the centennial trees until reaching a low point in the back wall. With skill born of necessity, Grace climbed and jumped to the other side, landing on a secondary road that she hoped would lead her back to the city. Her clothes were already soaked, hair stuck to her face, but fear gave her the strength to continue. 25 years of lies. If my mother fled in such fear, what would they do to me now? She wondered as she walked hurriedly along the deserted road, occasionally looking back to make sure she wasn't being followed. I don't trust anyone in that house, except perhaps William, and even then, I barely know him. The road wound between wooded hills, illuminated only by the moon that occasionally appeared between heavy clouds. Grace calculated she would need to walk at least 2 hours to reach the city limits, where she could find a taxi or bus. With each step, the mud from the road clung to her shoes, making the walk more difficult. The silence of the night was broken only by the sound of rain on leaves and the occasional hoot of a distant owl. That's when she heard it, first as a distant purr, then increasingly louder. the unmistakable sound of an engine approaching. Instinctively, Grace hid behind a wide tree at the roadside, her heart racing when she saw the headlights of a car appearing around the bend. It wasn't William's limousine, nor any other vehicle she had seen at the mansion. It was a black sedan, discreet and anonymous, advancing slowly like a predator seeking its prey. It can't be a coincidence, she thought, recognizing with horror the doctor's profile at the wheel when the car slowly passed her hiding place. How did they know so quickly? Someone must have seen me leaving. The car passed her without stopping, but soon ahead it slowed down, the headlights sweeping the roadsides in an evident search pattern. Grace waited until the vehicle disappeared around the next bend, and then ran in the opposite direction, abandoning the road and plunging into the brush that led to an embankment. The rain had intensified again, turning the sloping terrain into a slippery trap. Each step was a calculated risk, her hands grasping roots and stones to maintain balance. Behind her, she heard the sound of the car returning, now faster. The headlights illuminated the vegetation in ghostly flashes, revealing her silhouette for a fatal instant. A muffled scream escaped her when she heard the car stop abruptly and the door open. "Miss Grace." The doctor's voice was falsely cordial, but loaded with an underlying threat. "Please don't be frightened. William is worried about you. I came to take you back. It's dangerous to walk alone on this road, especially in this weather." "Stay away from me!" shouted Grace, no longer pretending to hide. "I heard what you said to Charlotte. I know what you did to my mother." The doctor advanced to the edge of the road, his face partially illuminated by the car's headlights. The solicitous expression had disappeared, replaced by a calculating coldness that confirmed all of Grace's fears. His eyes scanned the darkness, adjusting to locate the young woman among the trees. Grace backed away, feeling the terrain becoming increasingly steep and unstable under her feet. "Don't be foolish, girl," he warned, taking another step toward her. "No one will believe your fanciful stories. You have no idea of the forces you're fighting against. Your mother eventually understood that, though too late." The implications of those words hit Grace like a physical blow. The sudden understanding that the cancer that killed her mother might not have been natural paralyzed her momentarily. Taking advantage of this hesitation, the doctor quickly advanced toward her. In panic, Grace turned and ran down the embankment, her feet losing their grip in the rain-soaked mud. Before she could steady herself, she was falling, tumbling uncontrollably down the slope. "Help!" Her cry was swallowed by the storm as her body was thrown against rocks, until a final impact against a protruding stone. A searing pain exploded in her head, followed by darkness. At that same moment, William was driving back to the mansion, having cut short his meeting after feeling an inexplicable urgency to return. Something about that girl, his daughter, he was almost certain, had awakened long-dormant emotions. The similarities to Rachel were undeniable, as were his own features in her face. "I need to protect her now," he muttered as he pushed forward on the wet road. If my mother and the doctor lied about Rachel, what else might they be capable of? It was then that his headlights illuminated the black sedan parked by the roadside, engine still running, driver's door open. There was no sign of the driver, but William immediately recognized the vehicle. It was the doctor's personal car. A dark foreboding seized him. He quickly parked and stepped out into the rain, calling for the doctor. A movement at the edge of the road caught his attention. The doctor was hurriedly climbing up the embankment, his expensive suit covered in mud, his face a mask of fake concern upon seeing William. "William! How fortunate to find you here," he exclaimed, his voice excessively controlled. "I was heading home when I saw someone on the road. I stopped to check, but I think it was just an animal." William didn't immediately respond. His eyes scanned the slippery embankment, noticing the recent trail in the mud where someone or something had fallen. His heart raced with sudden terror. Completely ignoring the doctor, he hurriedly descended the slope, slipping and nearly falling several times, desperately calling for Grace. The silence he received in response only intensified his dread. When he finally found her, her motionless body partially covered by fallen leaves, an anguished cry escaped his throat. Grace was unconscious, injured and pale, her dark hair contrasting with the damp earth around her. "Grace! For God's sake, answer me!" William pleaded, kneeling beside her, checking her pulse with trembling fingers. A sigh of relief escaped him as he felt the weak but present pulse. "What did you do to her?" he shouted to the doctor, who was observing the scene from the edge of the embankment. Nothing. She must have fallen while running away. The doctor defended himself, his face a mask of innocence. We need to take her to the hospital immediately. Let me help, I'm a doctor, I can. Stay where you are, William ordered, with an authority that made the doctor instantly freeze. Don't come near her. I'll carry her myself. Carefully, William lifted Grace's unconscious body in his arms, shielding her from the rain with his own body. The fear of moving her and aggravating possible internal injuries competed with the urgency of getting immediate medical help. Deciding there was no time to lose, he laboriously climbed up the embankment, refusing any assistance from the doctor, who now maintained a cautious distance, something in his expression suggesting rapid calculations about how to explain the situation. I'm taking her to the hospital right now, William announced upon reaching the road, heading directly to his own car. And I strongly suggest you don't return to the mansion, Doctor. Your services to my family are officially terminated. William, be reasonable. The doctor tried, his voice now openly nervous. The girl was clearly disoriented, running away in the middle of the night. I was only trying to help. Your mother will be devastated if you... My mother, William interrupted, his gaze colder than the rain that drenched them, will have much to explain when I return, as will you. Now get out of my way. The central hospital stood like a white fortress against the still dark sky when William arrived, his hands stained with Grace's blood, his body trembling not from cold, but from a primitive fear of losing something precious he had barely just found. The emergency team responded immediately to the arrival of the town's most powerful man, carrying an injured young woman. Grace was placed on a stretcher and quickly taken inside, doctors and nurses moving with the trained efficiency of those who face death daily. William followed as far as they allowed, only stopping when the trauma room doors closed in front of him. He stood there paralyzed, watching through the glass as the team worked to stabilize Grace, cutting away her soaked clothes, connecting monitors, checking pupils, stemming the bleeding from her head. Sir, we need some information. A nurse approached him, offering him a towel to dry himself. What is the patient's full name? Age? Do you have any relatives we can contact? Grace, her last name. I don't. She is 24 years old, William replied, suddenly realizing with horror how little he knew about his own daughter. Her grandmother. She lives with her grandmother, who is ill. I don't know the exact address. Minutes turned into agonizing hours as William waited, unable to leave the corridor in front of the room where Grace fought for her life. Nurses brought him coffee that grew cold untouched. Doctors provided technical updates that he barely understood in his state of shock. The words cranial trauma, internal bleeding, critical condition hovered around him like ominous ravens. It was when the medical team left the room, their faces revealing the gravity of the situation, that William felt the ground disappear beneath his feet. Sir, we've stabilized the patient, but she's lost a lot of blood, explained the chief physician, his exhausted face reflecting the long battle fought. We need to perform a transfusion immediately, but she has a rather rare blood type. We're checking our blood bank, but supplies are low due to the storm accidents. An older nurse approached, holding a newly completed form. We managed to get some basic information through her ID. We've already contacted her grandmother, who is on her way, but she's also too weak to donate. Grace's grandmother arrived half an hour later, a fragile lady leaning on a cane, her face marked by years of sacrifice and now by an indescribable terror. Upon seeing William in the waiting room, her eyes widened in recognition, not of the man but of the features he shared with her granddaughter. For a tense moment, the two stared at each other, united by concern for Grace, separated by decades of secrets and absence. You must be William, the lady finally said, her voice surprisingly firm despite her fragile body. Rachel spoke of you in her final days, said she needed to tell me the truth about Grace's father, but cancer took her before she could gather the courage. Please, tell me what you know, William begged, gently guiding her to a chair. Grace is fighting for her life and the doctors say she needs an urgent transfusion. She has a rare blood type. Tears ran down the elderly woman's wrinkled face. Just like Rachel, only she could donate to Grace. It was a problem when the little one was born, needing a transfusion. Rachel almost died donating all the blood she could. William stood up abruptly, a sudden understanding illuminating his face. My blood type is AB negative, extremely rare. If Grace is my daughter, as I believe she is, there's a possibility we're compatible. I'll test you immediately, offered the chief physician who had overheard the conversation. If you're compatible, we can proceed with the transfusion without losing more time. William's family doctor arrived at the hospital at that moment, his face a mask of false concern. Seeing William about to be tested to donate blood, he quickly intervened, poorly disguised nervousness in his voice. William, don't be hasty. Donating blood is a serious procedure, with your heart condition and... I don't have any heart condition, William cut him off, looking at him with growing suspicion. And I don't remember calling you here. The test results came with a speed born of urgency. The chief physician returned, surprise evident on his professional face. Your blood is perfectly compatible with hers, sir. It's an extremely rare coincidence, unless... The unfinished phrase hung in the air, loaded with implications. William didn't need to hear it completed. Without hesitation, he extended his arm to the nurse who was preparing the collection equipment. As his blood flowed into the bags that would save Grace's life, William discreetly requested a nurse to also collect samples for a paternity test. The young nurse, recognizing the seriousness of the request, nodded silently, arranging the additional tubes. The hours that followed were a silent vigil at Grace's bedside, who now breathed more easily, her skin slowly regaining color. The grandmother had fallen asleep in an armchair in the corner of the room, exhausted by worry and her own frailty. William observed the sleeping face of his probable daughter, noting every small detail. The curve of the eyebrow identical to his, the shape of the nose that reminded him of his own mother in old photos, the determination that seemed to emanate from her even in her unconscious state. 25 years lost. 25 years of moments he had never lived. First steps, words, school days, graduation. An entire life stolen from him. And from her. I won't lose another day, he promised silently, holding Grace's motionless hand. If you are my daughter, as I believe with all my heart that you are, I will spend the rest of my life making up for every moment lost. Dawn was beginning to illuminate the room when a young doctor silently entered, handing William a sealed envelope. The preliminary results of the paternity test had been processed with maximum priority, thanks to a generous donation to the hospital laboratory. With trembling hands, William opened the envelope, his eyes quickly scanning the medical terms until they found the conclusion. Probability of paternity, virtually 100%. There were no more doubts. Grace was his daughter. The sound of the door abruptly opening broke the solemn moment. Charlotte entered the room, her diminutive body seeming even smaller with the weight of the situation. Her eyes, normally cold and calculating, were now red and swollen, as if she had been crying for hours. Upon seeing William holding the test results, she stopped, her expression oscillating between defiance and defeat. "What have you done, son?" she asked, her voice a broken whisper. William rose slowly, his body tired from the sleepless night, but his determination intact. He held the test results like a weapon, like the final proof of decades of lies. His eyes, so similar to Grace's, now fixed on his mother with an intensity that made the elderly woman step back. "I discovered everything, Mother," he declared, keeping his voice low so as not to disturb Grace or her grandmother. The fake documents, the money paid to Rachel to disappear, the clandestine clinic. The doctor confessed everything when I confronted him by phone an hour ago, after the police detained him on the road. He's talking a lot, trying to save his own skin. Charlotte's face lost what little color it had. With no strength in her legs, the matriarch collapsed in the nearest chair, her cane falling noisily on the tiled floor. Her eyes, now defeated, stared at the floor as if she could find some justification for her actions there. "You don't understand. I did it out of love," she murmured, tears finally breaking the aristocratic composure she had maintained throughout her life. "That woman would have ruined you. A simple seamstress with no education, no social position. I had great plans for you, for our family." Before William could respond, a sharp and alarming sound erupted in the room. The monitors connected to Grace began to beep frantically, her vital signs dangerously oscillating on the digital graphs. The young woman's body, previously peacefully asleep, now convulsed on the bed. The grandmother woke up startled, a cry of horror escaping her lips at seeing her granddaughter in such a state. "Help! Someone help!" shouted William, running to the door while Charlotte observed the scene with growing horror. Doctors and nurses invaded the room, moving with organized urgency around Grace's bed. William and the grandmother were gently but firmly led outside, while Charlotte remained paralyzed in her chair, unable to move, her eyes fixed on the chaos unfolding before her. The technical words exchanged by the medical team sounded like a foreign language to the untrained ears of the family members, but the urgent and grave tone was unequivocal. "Pressure dropping. We need to intubate now. Prepare the defibrillator." In the corridor, William embraced Grace's fragile grandmother, both united by the terror of losing the person they had just discovered was their common link. The closed doors of the room now separated them from the fight for life happening inside. Time seemed frozen, each second stretching into an eternity of uncertainty and fear. "Please don't take her now," William prayed silently, looking at the white, sterile ceiling as if he could see beyond it. "I just found her. Please, don't take her like you took Rachel." The soft morning light filtered through the curtains of the hospital room when Grace finally opened her eyes after 3 days of unconsciousness. For a moment, her vision remained blurry, struggling to focus on the unfamiliar environment. The rhythmic sound of the medical devices was the first thing she registered, followed by the sensation of a hand firmly holding hers. Turning her head slightly, she saw William asleep in the armchair beside her bed, his face marked by the fatigue of nights keeping vigil. His fingers intertwined with hers, even during sleep, as if he feared she might disappear if he let go. "He hasn't left here for even a moment," whispered her grandmother, who approached silently from the other side of the bed. Just like Rachel described in her letters, loyal to the end. Grace looked around and realized with astonishment that the walls of the room were covered with photographs. Dozens of them, carefully fixed, showed her mother in her youth, Rachel smiling under the summer sun, Rachel reading a book under a leafy tree, Rachel and William embracing, looking at each other with undisguised love. A mural of lost memories now recovered, telling a love story that she had never been allowed to know. "Where did all these photos come from?" asked Grace, her voice hoarse from lack of use. "William kept them all these years," answered her grandmother, her tired eyes welling up. "He brought them all to this room, said he wanted you to wake up surrounded by the love that created you." The movement in the bed and the voices awakened William, who opened his eyes instantly, like someone accustomed to waking at the slightest sign of change. Seeing Grace conscious, his face transformed with an almost childlike joy. Uncontained tears flowed freely down his cheeks as he gently squeezed her hand. "You've come back to us," he said simply, his voice choked with emotion. "What happened?" asked Grace, fragments of memory returning like loose pieces of a puzzle. "I remember the doctor, the road, the fall." William breathed deeply, organizing thoughts that had been revisited countless times during the anguishing wait. With deliberately calm gestures, he removed an envelope from the inner pocket of the crumpled jacket he had been wearing for days. "First, I need you to know this," he said, handing her the paternity test result. "You are my daughter, Grace. My only daughter." Grace held the paper with trembling hands, the numbers and medical terms dancing before her eyes, but the conclusion perfectly clear. A truth that somehow she already knew in her heart from the moment she saw her mother's photograph in his wallet. Silent tears ran down her face as she raised her eyes to William, her father. "Why?" was the only word she could utter, carrying the weight of 25 years of involuntary absence. William sat on the edge of the bed and, holding Grace's hands in his, told her everything he had discovered in the last few days. How her mother and the doctor had conspired to separate the young couple when Rachel became pregnant, the forged documents, the money offered for her to disappear, and when Rachel refused the offer, the veiled threats against the child she was carrying. "Your mother fled to protect you," explained William, the old pain mixing with newly discovered anger. "She preferred to live in poverty, away from me rather than put you at risk." From a small box on the nightstand, William retrieved a yellowed envelope. The paper was worn at the folds, as if it had been opened and closed countless times. "They found this among the belongings your grandmother brought," he said softly. "A letter your mother never sent." Grace carefully unfolded the paper, immediately recognizing Rachel's delicate handwriting. The letter, dated a few days before her death, was addressed to William. "My beloved William, if this letter reaches your hands, I will no longer be in this world. For 25 years, I have kept a secret that has consumed my soul day after day. We have a daughter, William. Her name is Grace, and she has your eyes. I fled not for lack of love, but from an excess of it. Your mother threatened our daughter while still in my womb, and the doctor insinuated accidents that could happen if I stayed. I chose to protect the fruit of our love, even if it meant never seeing you again. I ask forgiveness for my cowardice, for never finding the courage to face your family's power. Perhaps if I had been stronger. Now I feel life slipping away, and my only regret is that Grace grew up without knowing the extraordinary man who is her father. With eternal love, Rachel." The bedroom door opened silently. Charlotte entered, almost unrecognizable. The powerful matriarch that Grace had met days before seemed to have aged a decade. Her hair, once impeccably arranged, now fell in misaligned strands. Her eyes, once cold and calculating, were now swollen and reddened. Leaning heavily on her cane, she slowly advanced until stopping at the foot of the bed. "The doctor confessed everything," announced William, without looking at his mother, "including about Rachel's cancer. It wasn't natural." A heavy silence filled the room. To everyone's surprise, Charlotte slowly knelt before Grace's bed, an unthinkable gesture for a woman of her pride and position. "There are no words that can justify what I did," murmured the elderly woman, her voice broken by shame. "Please don't condemn your father for my sins. He never knew." Grace observed the kneeling woman, feeling not hatred, but a profound sadness for a life consumed by pride and prejudice. After a long moment, she silently extended her hand to Charlotte, not in complete acceptance, but as a first step on a long path of healing. "My mother always said that forgiveness liberates the one who forgives first," Grace said softly. "It will take time, but I don't want hatred to define our family for another generation." 6 months later, the imposing family mansion breathed new life. The gates, once closed and intimidating, now remained open, welcoming young pregnant women or those with babies, many of them abandoned by their families. Where once lonely footsteps echoed through empty corridors, now voices and children's laughter resonated. William proudly watched his daughter guiding a group of teenage mothers in the garden. Grace moved among them with a gentleness inherited from Rachel, but with a strength and determination he recognized as his own. At her side, a nurse organized materials for the newborn care class. "She looks so much like Rachel," William remarked, contemplating the worn photograph he now kept in a frame in his office. The nurse smiled, adjusting a small crib. "Mrs. Rachel would be proud, sir. Your daughter has transformed a story of hatred into a story of love." In the garden, Charlotte worked silently, planting flowers as part of her community service sentence. The once feared matriarch now found peace in the simple act of nurturing new life, surrounded by those she once despised. Her gaze crossed with Grace's, who gently nodded, a gesture acknowledging the path still being traveled. As the sun set over the property, bathing the building in golden hues, the new sign at the entrance gleamed, "Rachel Foundation, so that no true love will be separated by pride or power." If Grace and William's story moved you, don't forget to subscribe, like, and comment where you're from. And don't go anywhere. The next story is already appearing on the screen, made especially for you. See you soon. The precarious protection, made of a piece of plastic attached to a fence and some stacked cardboard boxes, barely kept away the evening dew that was beginning to fall on that grey afternoon. Autumn, with her small 7 years, tangled dark hair and large eyes that seemed to hold the wisdom of someone much older, watched the twin brothers who slept on a thin blanket spread on the concrete floor, wrapped in donated pieces of fabric. Her trembling little hands constantly adjusted the cloth over the babies, while her throat burned with a cough she tried to suppress so as not to wake them. "You need to stay warm, yes? Mommy will be back soon and will bring food for all of us." She promised she wouldn't be long this time. The sky was beginning to darken earlier than normal, a harbinger of the storm that was forming. Autumn felt a shiver run through her frail body. The fever that had begun as a slight discomfort in the morning now made her body burn inside, contrasting with the damp cold of the environment. Her heavy eyes struggled to stay open as she watched over the twins. She couldn't sleep, not when she was alone with them. Emily, her mother, had left hours earlier to try to get some money or food in the busy streets of downtown, as she had done every day since they lost everything. "Just a little longer, I just need to hold on a little longer. When Mommy comes back, I can rest. I have to be strong like she always says." One of the babies began to whimper, his little red face contracting in a cry that would soon become more intense. Autumn dragged herself to him, ignoring the dizziness that made the world spin around her. Gently, she took the little one in her arms, rocking him as she had seen her mother do so many times. Despite her young age, Autumn had learned to care for her brothers. It was what she could do to help her mother, who had been trying to keep them in any way she could since their father abandoned them. There was no option in her world. Either she grew up quickly and took on responsibilities, or they would all suffer even more. Her small hands caressed the baby's head, feeling the warmth emanating from him. Would he have a fever too? "Don't cry, little one. Everything's okay, Autumn is here." The sound of the rain beginning to fall mingled with the baby's cry, creating a symphony of despair that Autumn tried to calm with her childish voice. The other twin, as if understanding his brother's distress, also began his lament. Now there were two babies crying, while Autumn tried to divide them in her arms that were too small for such responsibility. A strong cough shook her body, making her almost drop one of the babies. Silent tears ran down her cheeks, flushed with fever, but she couldn't afford the luxury of breaking down. Not now. "Calm down, please, calm down. I know you're hungry, I am too. Mommy will bring something, she always does. She would never leave us without food, you know that." A thunder cut across the sky, momentarily illuminating the darkness under the viaduct. Autumn cowered, fear mixing with the physical pain she felt. The babies cried louder, frightened by the sudden noise. She looked toward the opening of the makeshift shelter, expecting to see her mother's silhouette at any moment. But time passed, and Emily did not return. The last bottle prepared hours earlier with water from a public tap, and the little remaining powdered milk was gone, and the twins were starving. Autumn knew her mother would never take so long without a good reason. "Where are you, Mommy? The babies are hungry and I don't know what else to do. You said you'd be back before the rain, remember?" The rain intensified with each minute, transforming into a fierce storm. Water began to run down from the viaduct, invading the small space where they sheltered. Autumn pulled the blanket with the babies to the corner that still seemed dry. Her head throbbed, and the cough became more frequent. She looked at the small wristwatch her mother had given her, the only valuable object they still possessed, found in the trash and fixed by a kind man, and saw that it was already past 6 in the evening. Emily never stayed out until so late, especially with the threat of a storm. "Something happened to her, I know something happened. Mommy would never leave us alone for so long, not with the rain coming. What if she needs help?" A noise made Autumn stand up, hopeful. It was Emily, soaked from the rain, holding a plastic bag against her chest. Autumn ran outside, ignoring the heavy drops falling on her to help her mother. When she got closer, she noticed that Emily was in an alarming state. Her face, normally already pale from the hard life, now had an almost grey coloration. Her lips were purple, and she was shaking violently. "Autumn, my child, I got milk for the babies." Autumn took the bag and helped her mother. Emily could barely stand, leaning on her daughter in a way she had never done before. When they reached the blanket on the floor, Emily collapsed, breathing with difficulty. Her eyes, identical to Autumn's, were dull and distant. The girl felt a fear like never before. She placed her hand on her mother's forehead and immediately withdrew it, frightened by the heat emanating from her. "Mom, you're burning with fever. You need to take off these wet clothes. It will make things worse. Let me help you." Emily tried to answer, but only a weak moan escaped her lips. Autumn, despite her own discomfort, began to remove her mother's soaked clothes, replacing them with dry pieces she found in the small bag of belongings they kept. All the while the babies cried, hungry and frightened. The girl divided herself between caring for her mother and preparing milk for her siblings. With trembling hands, she managed to mix the powdered milk with water from a saved bottle, doing the best she could to feed the twins. "Everything will be all right, Mum. You just need to rest a bit. I'll take care of everything. Don't worry. So I have already given milk to the babies, see? They're calmer now." Emily's breathing became more difficult with each minute. Her chest rose and fell in an irregular rhythm, and a frightening wheeze accompanied each inhalation. Autumn had never seen her mother so sick. She tried to make her drink water, but Emily could barely swallow. The fever seemed to consume her strength rapidly. Autumn wet a piece of cloth with water from the bottle and placed it on her mother's forehead, as Emily used to do when she got sick. "You'll get better soon, Mommy. It's just a fever. It will pass. Tomorrow you'll be better. I know you will." The hours passed, and Emily's condition only worsened. The rain continued to fall mercilessly, and water began to invade more and more of their small space. Autumn fought against her own fever to stay alert. With each passing minute, her certainty grew that they needed urgent help. Emily's cough now came with breathing so difficult that it seemed each breath might be her last. In a moment of lucidity, Emily opened her eyes and fixed them on Autumn. "Daughter, listen. You need to get help. I can't breathe properly or even get up. I need you to be strong. The babies. Take care of them. I love you, my love. I love all of you." Autumn felt panic growing inside her. Leaving the shelter meant exposing everyone to the storm. But staying could be even worse. Her own cough was getting stronger, and the babies seemed restless, one of them with skin hot to the touch, possibly with fever as well. She looked at her mother, whose eyes were now closed again, her body shaken by tremors. "Help! Where will I find help at this hour in this rain? And how do I take the babies with me? I can't leave them here with you like this." A particularly strong thunder shook the air, and Autumn noticed that water was already beginning to reach where her mother was lying. They couldn't stay there. Her mother needed a doctor urgently, and she herself felt that she couldn't hold on much longer. With determination that didn't match her age, she began to gather what they would need. She found a plastic bag large enough to put the babies in, and some clean cloths they used as diapers. "Don't worry, Mum. I'll get help and come back with someone to get you. I promise I'll take care of the babies. I won't let anything bad happen to them." Emily didn't respond. Her eyes remained closed, and only the weak movement of her chest indicated she was still breathing. Autumn felt a knot in her throat, but she swallowed her tears. She had to be strong now. She put the twins in the bag, wrapping them in pieces of fabric to protect them from the rain. She took an old torn beanie that someone had donated and put it on her own head, knowing it would be insufficient against the storm. Before leaving, she knelt beside her mother and kissed her hot forehead. "I'll be back soon, Mom. Hold on, please. I need you. We all need you." The storm was even worse than it had seemed from inside the shelter under the viaduct. The rain fell in dense curtains, making visibility difficult. Autumn pressed the bag against her chest, trying to protect the babies as much as possible. Her trembling legs took her to the main street, where she hoped to find someone who could help. But the streets were deserted, everyone sheltered from the storm. Even so, she continued walking, determined not to return without help. "Everything will be all right, little ones. We'll find someone good who can help our mother. You'll see. Tomorrow we'll all be together again and Mommy will be well." Each step was an immense effort. The fever made her vision blur, and the cough constantly stopped her, forcing her to lean against building walls to avoid falling. The babies cried, bothered by the rain that occasionally hit their little faces. Autumn headed toward the city center, where she knew there was a hospital. It was far, perhaps too far for her current strength, but she saw no other option. "Just a little more, just a few more streets. I know you're cold and hungry, but we need to continue. We can't go back without help for Mommy." The downtown streets began to appear, more illuminated despite the storm. Autumn felt brief relief seeing car lights passing, people running for shelter. Someone would help her, they had to help. She tried to call out, but her voice was too weak to be heard over the noise of the rain. Her steps took her to the central square, an open space where normally there would be many people, even at night. But the storm had driven most away. Only a few cars passed quickly, their drivers completely oblivious to the small, staggering figure carrying two babies. "Please, someone help me. My mother is very sick, she needs a doctor." A new coughing fit made her stop in the middle of the square. Autumn felt her legs weaken. The bag with the babies weighed on her tired arms. Her vision darkened at the edges, and a strange buzzing filled her ears. She fought to stay standing, to continue, but her small body had reached its limit. She thought of her mother alone under the viaduct, perhaps dying with no one to help her. She thought of the babies who depended on her to survive. She tried to take another step but couldn't. "I'm sorry, Mommy, I tried. I swear I tried." The world spun around Autumn, the streetlight lights becoming golden blurs in her vision. She felt her knees touch the wet ground of the square, the bag with the baby still firmly clutched against her chest. Even in that moment, her protective instinct didn't abandon her. With one last effort, she positioned the bag so the babies wouldn't fall when she could no longer hold them. The twins' crying was now the only thing she heard, drowning out the noise of the rain. "Someone will find us. Someone good will help us, Mikis. They have to help." Autumn's eyelids became too heavy to keep open. Her body, overcome by illness and exhaustion, gave in completely. She fell sideways onto the square's ground, the merciless rain washing her feverish face. Beside her, protected as best she could in the improvised bag, the twins cried desperately, their wails echoing through the empty square. Autumn no longer heard them. Darkness enveloped her, taking away the pain, cold and fear. Her last conscious thought was a silent prayer that someone would find the babies in time. "Please, someone, help. Dear God, please help my family," the girl implored in prayer. And so, unconscious under the merciless storm, Autumn lay motionless in the central square, while the baby's crying mingled with the sound of rain, a desperate appeal awaiting response amid the stormy night. The night embraced the central square with its damp darkness, while the storm poured water mercilessly over the sleeping city. Andrew Mitchell observed the urban landscape through the window of his luxury car, his face marked by the fatigue of another day spent by his son's hospital bed. Drops ran down the tinted glass, distorting the streetlight lights into golden blurs, like tears from a sky that shared his silent pain. The driver slowly moved along the deserted avenue, circling the square to reach the mansion on the city outskirts, when Andrew noticed something unusual. A small figure in the middle of the square, motionless under the torrential rain. "Stop the car now, there's someone fallen there in the square. Looks like a child." The sudden brake projected Andrew slightly forward, but his hand was already on the door handle before the vehicle completely stopped. Ignoring the rain that immediately soaked his Italian suit, he ran toward the fallen figure. What he saw squeezed his heart in a way he hadn't felt since his son's accident. A girl, no more than a child, unconscious on the wet pavement. Even more alarming beside her, an improvised bag from which came sharp cries, babies, 2 of them, precariously protected from the merciless rain. My God, they're children. How can they be here alone in this storm? Andrew didn't hesitate. He removed his coat and carefully covered the girl, noticing her warm skin despite the cold rain. High fever, no doubt. He shouted to the driver, who was already approaching with an umbrella, and together, with gentleness, they lifted the little one. The babies appeared newborn, their little faces red from crying so much. The situation was an absolute emergency. With the girl in his arms and the driver carrying the bag with the twins, they quickly returned to the car. "Central Hospital, quickly. Call the doctor and tell him we're coming with an emergency. A child and 2 babies in critical condition." The luxurious vehicle cut through the deserted streets on its way to the private hospital, where Andrew's son was hospitalized. In the back seat, the businessman held the girl in his arms, trying to warm her. His angular face, normally composed and controlled during the most difficult negotiations, now reflected genuine concern. He observed the little one's face, her delicate features contracted in an uneasy sleep, and something stirred within him. A distant memory, perhaps, of his own daughter he never got to know, lost along with his wife in a complicated childbirth years ago. "Hang on, little one. You're going to be fine, I promise. I won't let anything happen to you or these babies." The hospital appeared in the rainy landscape, its white lights a beacon of hope in the gloomy night. The medical team, alerted by the phone call, was waiting at the emergency entrance. Andrew jumped out of the car with the girl in his arms, while the driver brought the babies. The clinical efficiency of the place immediately went into action. Stretchers were brought, the girl and babies were placed under care, and in seconds they were being taken inside. Andrew followed along, his status as a benefactor of the hospital opening all doors, his imposing presence brushing aside any questioning. "I want the best specialists. Don't economize on anything." These children need the best care this hospital can offer. The doctors worked frantically. The girl, placed on a stretcher, was quickly connected to monitors and given an oxygen mask. The babies were taken to the neonatal ward, where experienced nurses examined, cleaned, and warmed them. Andrew observed everything from the corridor, his hands still trembling from the adrenaline, his soaked suit forgotten as he followed the movement of the team. One of the doctors, after an initial examination, approached him with a grave expression, clipboard in hand and a concerned look behind his glasses. "Mr. Mitchell, the situation is critical. The girl has severe pneumonia, probably aggravated by prolonged exposure, malnutrition, and exhaustion. The babies are dehydrated but more stable." Andrew felt a pang of pain upon hearing the diagnosis. Children abandoned to their own fate, struggling to survive in inhumane conditions. It was a reality he knew through statistics, through the social projects he funded, but which now materialized in a raw form before his eyes. He ran his hand through the grey hair at his temples, a gesture of anguish he rarely allowed himself to show. The irony didn't escape him. He, with all his money, couldn't bring his son back from a coma, while these children, with nothing, fought desperately for a chance at life. "Do everything necessary. I want constant reports on their condition. Any identification, any clue about who they are or where they came from." A movement on the stretcher caught everyone's attention. The girl briefly regained consciousness, her large, frightened eyes trying to focus on the unfamiliar environment around her. Her breathing was laborious even with the help of oxygen, and her dry lips moved, trying to form words. Andrew quickly approached, leaning in to hear what she was trying to say. Her voice was just a whisper, broken by difficult breathing and coughing. "My mother. Please help my mother. She's sick. Under the viaduct on the main avenue. Please." The words came out with visible effort, each syllable costing precious energy that the girl clearly couldn't spare. Her eyes, feverish but determined, fixed on Andrew's for a brief moment before closing again, overcome by exhaustion. The doctor immediately adjusted the oxygen flow and signaled to the nurse who administered medication into the IV. The child had returned to unconsciousness but had left crucial information. "She has a mother. We need to find her right now." Andrew wasted no time. He called his driver and his personal assistant by phone, mobilizing a small search team. He gave instructions based on the girl's confused words. The viaduct on the main avenue, probably one of the known locations where homeless people sought shelter. Meanwhile, he turned his attention to the doctors, who were now discussing the case with increasingly grim expressions. One of them, apparently the pulmonology specialist, was shaking his head while examining the first test results. "Her chances aren't good. The lung involvement is extensive, and there are signs that the infection may be spreading to the bloodstream. We need aggressive intervention." Time seemed to stretch like a taut elastic as Andrew waited in the hospital corridor. The babies, now clean, fed, and warmed, had been placed in proper cribs, with monitors checking their vital functions. They were responding well to care, their tiny faces now peaceful in sleep. The girl, however, had been taken for more intensive procedures, and her condition seemed to deteriorate with each hour. Andrew paced back and forth, occasionally stopping to observe the twins through the glass. Something about those helpless children had touched a part of his heart that he thought had died since the tragedy with his family and his son's accident. How can such a small child endure so much, taking care of babies sick on the street, while we're in our comfortable homes, complaining about trivial problems? Andrew's phone rang, interrupting his thoughts. It was his driver with news of the search. They had found an unconscious woman under the viaduct, exactly where the girl had indicated. Her condition was extremely serious, very high fever, barely perceptible breathing, weak pulse. The hospital ambulance was already on its way at Andrew's request. He hung up the phone with a mixture of relief and apprehension. They had found the mother, but from the report, perhaps too late. At least now we know the girl wasn't delirious. Her mother really is there needing help. I hope there's still time. Less than 30 minutes later, the emergency doors opened to receive a new patient. Andrew observed from a distance the arrival of the woman, a fragile and worn figure on the stretcher, almost disappearing under the blankets and medical equipment. The same doctors who were attending to the girl were called, and soon they were examining the newcomer with the same grave expression. The resemblance between mother and daughter was evident, even with both in critical condition. The same delicate features, the same dark hair, now tangled and dirty. It's pneumonia too, and in a very advanced state. Probably what the daughter has. We need an ICU bed immediately. The word ICU made Andrew shudder. He knew that place well, spent hours there every day beside his comatose son. He knew that an ICU bed meant critical condition, life hanging by a thread. Now mother and daughter needed this precious resource, and he was fully aware that even in a first-rate private hospital, intensive care beds were limited. He approached the chief physician, his expression making clear his willingness to do whatever necessary. If you need to transfer someone to another hospital to open beds, do it. I'll cover all costs. These people are my responsibility now. The following hours passed in a blur of intense activity. Autumn, as Andrew finally discovered was the girl's name after finding a handmade bracelet with the name engraved on her wrist, was taken to the pediatric ICU. Her mother, Emily, identified by documents kept in a small plastic bag protected inside her clothes, was admitted to the adult ICU. Doctors ran between the two units, consulting with each other, adjusting treatments, trying to stabilize two lives that were rapidly fading. The situation is complicated. Both need all our attention and resources, but we are a limited team. In cases like this, we have to make difficult choices. Andrew was sitting in a chair in the corridor between the two rooms, observing the comings and goings of the professionals. He had exchanged his wetsuit for sterilized hospital clothes and held a cup of coffee that had already cooled without him taking a single sip. His assistant had been tasked with caring for the twins, ensuring they received all necessary care. Meanwhile, Andrew found himself divided between 3 hospital beds, his sons, the girls, and the mothers. 3 lives suspended on a thin thread, 3 destinies now intertwined with his own. How can I help more? There must be something I can do besides paying the bills. These people entered my life for a reason. One of the doctors left the children's unit with a concerned expression. Andrew stood up immediately, preparing himself for bad news. The doctor, however, wasn't bringing a final sentence, but an ethical and practical dilemma. The team was divided between the 2 patients, and resources, not financial but human, were being stretched to the limit. Autumn needed a specialized procedure urgently, but that would mean relocating part of the team attending to Emily, potentially compromising her already reduced chances. Mr. Mitchell, I hate to put you in this position, but we need your guidance. You brought them in, you're covering the costs. Who should we focus our most intensive efforts on at this critical moment? The question fell like a weight on Andrew's shoulders. How could he decide between the life of an innocent child and the mother who had so desperately tried to save her? What right did he have to make such a choice? His gaze wandered from the doctor to the ICU doors, imagining the 2 fragile figures fighting for each breath. He thought of his own son, in a coma for months, and how devastated he would be if someone had to choose between saving him or himself. He took a deep breath, searching within himself for the wisdom to make an impossible decision. I will not make this choice. Bring more doctors, hire specialists from other hospitals if necessary. Pay whatever it takes, but don't ask me to choose who lives and who dies. The determination in Andrew's voice surprised the doctor. It wasn't the answer he expected, but he respected it. With a nod, he walked away to make calls, mobilize resources, seek alternatives. Andrew sat back down, now with the weight of anguish multiplied. He looked at his watch, almost dawn. The storm outside had diminished, but the one forming within these white aseptic walls was only growing in intensity. If there is any greater force in this universe, may it protect us all now. These people have suffered too much already. The corridor began to gain more movement with the morning shift change. Fresh nurses and doctors arrived, receiving reports of the tumultuous night. Andrew remained at his post, refusing to go home to rest. He had called his son's room, asking the private nurse accompanying him to give updates every hour. Ethan remained stable in his deep sleep, oblivious to the drama unfolding just a few rooms away. I've been waiting so long for you to come back, my son. Now suddenly I'm waiting for 2 more lives. How strange fate is in its designs. The hospital director arrived personally, alerted by the unusual situation. He spoke briefly with Andrew, ensuring that all possible resources were being mobilized. More specialists had been called, additional equipment was on the way. Andrew's influence and financial resources opened doors that would normally remain closed to people in Autumn and Emily's situation. The businessman thanked him with a silent nod, his mind still occupied with the extraordinary events of the past few hours. "Do whatever is in your power, Doctor. These people are important to me, even if I don't yet fully understand why." The pediatric ICU doors suddenly opened. A team of doctors rushed in with equipment, tense voices giving rapid orders. Andrew jumped up, his heart racing. Something was happening with Autumn. He tried to peek inside as the door swung, catching glimpses of the small figure in the bed, now surrounded by professionals working frantically. One of the monitors emitted a sharp and insistent alarm. Her heart was failing. "No, Autumn, don't give up now. You've come this far, been so brave. You can't leave like this." Almost simultaneously, a similar commotion began in the adult ICU. Andrew looked from one door to the other, feeling completely helpless. Mother and daughter in separate rooms, fighting the same battle against death, their weakened bodies finally giving in after so much effort. The doctors had been clear. Both were severely compromised, their organisms exhausted by disease, hunger, cold. Pneumonia had found fertile ground in bodies already fragile from hard life on the streets. How can there be so much injustice in the world? A child and her mother innocent, paying such a high price just for being poor. Time seemed frozen as Andrew waited for news. Any news. The medical teams continued their urgent work, now invisible behind closed doors. The sounds of equipment and tense voices were the only indication of the drama unfolding inside those rooms. The first rays of sunlight penetrated through the corridor windows, cruelly contrasting with the darkness of the moment. Andrew felt the weight of a sleepless night, but refused to yield to fatigue. What bitter irony it would be if I brought them here only to see them depart. I cannot accept that, I simply cannot. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, one of the doctors emerged from the pediatric unit. His face reflected exhaustion, but there was something more, a faint glimpse of hope. He approached Andrew, removing his surgical mask, revealing a slight smile of relief. In his hands, he held a clipboard with the girl's vital signs, now stabilized after the crisis. "We managed to bring her back, Mr. Mitchell. Autumn is an incredible fighter. She's not out of danger yet, but she responded to the emergency treatment. Now we need to see how her mother is responding." While Andrew absorbed that first piece of good news, the doors of the other ICU also opened. A second doctor appeared, this one with a more serious expression, though not entirely defeated. Emily had survived the crisis too, but her condition was even more delicate than her daughter's. Her body, already weakened for a longer time and with fewer reserves than the child's, was struggling much more difficultly. The next moments would be crucial for both, but especially for the mother. "We need more specialists for Emily. Her condition is extremely severe. Without intensive intervention in the next few hours, I don't know if we can keep her alive." Andrew absorbed the information like a physical blow. All his resources, all his money and influence might not be enough in the face of the fragility of a human life, so mistreated by fate. He looked at the exhausted doctors before him, those who had just accomplished what seemed impossible, bringing two people back from the brink of death. And then, he made another decision that would forever change the course of those intertwined lives. Bring the specialists you need, not just from this country, but from wherever necessary. Use my private jet if needed. "These people will not die today, not if I can help it," he ordered, and that's what they did. Morning arrived gently at the hospital, bringing with it a silence different from that of the anguishing night. It was no longer the silence of despair, but that of exhaustion after battle. 3 days had passed since Andrew Mitchell had found Autumn and the twins in the square. 3 days of constant vigil, of tireless doctors fighting to keep mother and daughter breathing. The specialists brought in urgently, some even from abroad, had worked without rest, applying advanced protocols, cutting-edge medications, and all the technology money could buy. And now, finally, a fragile stability had set in. Emily and Autumn had overcome the most critical phase, although the path to complete recovery was still long and uncertain. "They will survive, Mr. Mitchell. I still can't guarantee the absence of sequelae, especially in the mother, but we've managed to stabilize them. It was by a very narrow margin." Andrew observed Autumn through the glass of the pediatric unit, her small and fragile body surrounded by medical equipment that seemed to swallow her. The fever had subsided, but the pneumonia had left severe marks on her still-developing lungs. The girl slept most of the time, waking only in brief moments of confused consciousness. Emily, on another floor, also slept induced by medications, her adult body having suffered even more from prolonged illness and chronic malnutrition. The twins, on the other hand, completely recovered, were under the care of the nursing staff in the neonatal area, gaining weight and color each day. She's the same age Ethan was when he started learning piano, so small to face so much pain. A week passed, and Autumn was finally transferred to a private room. She still needed supplemental oxygen and constant medication, but the doctors were cautiously optimistic. Andrew had ordered the room to be prepared with all possible comfort, walls painted in soft tones, colorful curtains, even a small sound system that played children's music at a low volume. He visited 3 times a day, in the morning before going to Ethan's room, in the afternoon after lunch, and at night before returning to the empty mansion. He couldn't explain the connection he felt with that unknown family, but something about them had awakened a part of his humanity that he thought had been lost in the cold corridors of that same hospital. "You don't need to do all this for us. You've already done too much by saving us that night." It was the first time Autumn had been able to maintain a coherent conversation, her voice still weak, but her eyes regaining the sparkle of life. Andrew sat beside her bed, gently adjusting the pillow under her head. The girl observed him with curiosity and a gratitude that transcended words. She had asked about her brothers as soon as she regained consciousness, and Andrew had personally ensured that she could see them, having the nurses bring the babies for regular visits. Now they were in the room, sleeping in specially installed cribs. "I did nothing more than what any person would do. You're the one who deserves admiration, Autumn, taking care of your brothers alone, seeking help even while being so sick. You are extraordinary." The days turned into 2 weeks, and the routine established itself with surprising naturalness. I'll translate the text to English while keeping the original formatting and style. Autumn was gradually regaining her strength, now able to sit up in bed without help, and even take a few steps supported by the physiotherapist. Emily was also showing improvement, albeit more slowly. She had fully awakened and, after the initial confusion, understood the incredible sequence of events that had saved her family. The gratitude in her eyes when Andrew first entered her room was so intense that words became superfluous. She cried silently, holding the businessman's hand between her own, still fragile and trembling. "I will never be able to repay what you did for us, Mr. Mitchell. You saved my children when I couldn't protect them." It was during one of these visits that Andrew finally shared his own story. Sitting between the beds of Autumn and Emily, who now shared the same spacious room to be together, he spoke about Ethan, his only son, who had been in a coma for 8 months after a serious car accident. He told them about the wife he had lost years before, about the mansion too large for a man alone, about sleepless nights wondering if his son would ever wake up. His voice, normally firm and controlled, trembled slightly as he revealed his own vulnerabilities to these 2 people who, from strangers, had transformed into something close to family. Autumn listened to everything with solemn attention, her large eyes fixed on Andrew's face, absorbing every word, every barely contained emotion. When he finished his account, a comfortable silence filled the room, interrupted only by the soft sound of monitors and the occasional cry of one of the twins. It was Autumn who finally broke the silence, her small but determined voice cutting through the air like a sharp blade of childish truth. "Can I visit your son? Maybe he needs a friend to talk to, even if he can't answer. Mom always says nobody should be alone when they're sick." The innocent question caught Andrew off guard. In all those months, Ethan had never received visits other than from himself and the medical team. The 11-year-old boy, once full of energy and curiosity, had gradually been forgotten by the outside world, as often happens with patients in prolonged coma. The idea that an unknown child would want to keep him company stirred in Andrew an emotion he couldn't immediately name. He swallowed hard, surprised by his own reaction. "Of course you can, Autumn. If the doctor authorizes it, I'll be happy to take you to meet Ethan tomorrow." And so it was done. The next day, Autumn, now able to walk short distances with the help of a wheelchair, was led by Andrew to the room where Ethan remained in his deep sleep. The room was spacious and bright, decorated with photographs of the boy in happy moments, playing soccer, playing the piano, at birthday parties with friends. Andrew watched with apprehension as the nurse helped Autumn approach the bed, uncertain about how the girl would react to the sight of someone in a coma. To his surprise, Autumn showed no fear or discomfort. On the contrary, her eyes lit up with gentle curiosity. "He seems to be just sleeping. He's not much older than me, is he? Do you think he can hear us?" Autumn's visits to Ethan became part of the daily routine. At first, Andrew remained in the room the entire time, watching with curiosity the one-sided interaction. Autumn talked to Ethan as if he could respond at any moment, telling him about the twins, about the drawings she made, about the stories the nurse read to her. There was no condescension in her approach, only the pure and direct acceptance that only children can offer, in situations that adults complicate with their expectations and fears. "Today I managed to walk to the garden without the wheelchair. It was only for a few steps, but the doctor said it's a good sign. When you wake up, we can walk through the garden together." As the days passed, something extraordinary began to happen. The nurses caring for Ethan noticed small changes in his vital signs during Autumn's visits. Nothing dramatic, just subtle alterations in brain pattern, a slight acceleration of heartbeat when she spoke. The doctors, initially skeptical, began to pay more attention, carefully documenting each reaction. Andrew, who had already gone through so many false hopes, tried to contain his own optimism, but it was impossible to ignore the spark of possibility that these small changes represented. Patients in coma often respond to familiar presence, voice, touch. It may mean nothing, but it could also be a positive sign. Let's continue observing. 1 month after the fateful encounter in the square, Autumn was sufficiently recovered to be discharged. Emily had also improved significantly, although she still needed continuous care to strengthen her damaged lungs. It was then that Andrew made the invitation he had been planning for weeks. On a quiet afternoon, while they watched the twins playing in their cribs, he proposed that the family move into his mansion until they were completely recovered and could safely restart their lives. He offered Emily a job at one of his companies as soon as she was able and promised to take care of Autumn's education and the twins' future. "I have a house that's too big for just one man, empty rooms begging for life. You would be doing me a favor, bringing sound and movement to those silent walls." The move to the mansion occurred the following week. Andrew had prepared everything personally, transforming an entire wing of the house into a welcoming space for the family. Autumn's room was especially close to his, decorated with bright colors and shelves full of children's books. The twins had a room converted into a nursery, with everything they might need. Emily, still moved by the inexplicable generosity of this stranger who had become her benefactor, received a room overlooking the garden with easy access to other areas of the house. "I never imagined that one day I would live in a place like this. It feels like a dream I'm afraid to wake up from." The new routine was soon established. Andrew continued visiting Ethan daily, but now almost always accompanied by Autumn. The girl had developed a peculiar connection with the boy in a coma, talking to him for hours, reading stories with her childish voice still in recovery, sometimes simply holding his hand in contemplative silence. The doctors, increasingly intrigued, carefully documented each reaction, each minimal change in Ethan's brain patterns when Autumn was present. There was something about the child's presence that reached the young man in a way that no one else could. "It's as if she can reach him somewhere the rest of us cannot, as if they speak the same language at a level we don't understand." Andrew observed this connection with a mixture of hope and amazement. In all his life of business success, material achievements and influence, he had never witnessed something so inexplicable and at the same time so profoundly human as the bond that had formed between his comatose son and that child rescued from the streets. Sometimes he would stand in the hallway, listening to Autumn tell Ethan about her day, about her discoveries in the mansion, about the new drawings she had made especially for him. There was a purity in that interaction that moved him beyond words. "My plush angel always protected me when I was afraid. Mum said he has special powers. I think you need him more than I do now." On that particular afternoon, Andrew had left Autumn alone with Ethan for a few minutes while he took an important call in the hallway. When he returned, he found the girl leaning over the bed, placing something in his son's immobile hand. He approached silently, not wanting to interrupt the moment, and saw that it was a small plush angel worn by time and love, clearly the only toy Autumn possessed before meeting him. The scene froze his heart. That child who had so little, offering her most precious possession to a boy just a few years older than her, who couldn't even thank her. "This is my most special friend. He will stay with you now to protect you and help you find your way back home." Autumn placed the plush angel in Ethan's open palm, gently closing the young man's fingers around the small object. That's when it happened. At first, a subtle change. Ethan's fingers seemed to slightly squeeze the toy, an almost imperceptible movement that could easily be dismissed as imagination or wishful thinking. But then the heart monitors began to register changes. The brain pattern changed abruptly, and the machine started a chorus of sharp and insistent alarms. Andrew froze for a second before running to the hallway, calling for help. "Something's happening, come quickly, it's Ethan." In seconds, the medical team invaded the room, moving with the practiced efficiency of professionals trained for emergencies. A nurse moved Autumn away from the bed, while doctors surrounded Ethan, checking vital signs, pupils, muscle responses. Andrew held Autumn protectively, both watching the scene with a mixture of terror and hope. The plush angel remained firmly gripped in Ethan's hand, as if he refused to let it go even amid the chaos. "Please step back, we need space. Take the girl out." Andrew felt Autumn clinging to his leg, frightened by the sudden commotion and persistent alarms. He picked her up instinctively, but hesitated to leave the room, torn between the need to protect the child and the desperation to know what was happening to his son. One of the doctors looked at him urgently, making an emphatic gesture for them to leave. Reluctantly, Andrew took a step back, then another, until they were in the hallway, the door closing in front of them, separating them from the critical scene inside the room. What happened? Did I hurt him? I just wanted to give him my angel to protect him. Andrew knelt down to be at Autumn's eye level, seeing the fear and confusion in her gaze. He himself didn't know what to think, oscillating between the terror that something terrible was happening and the irrational hope that somehow that simple gesture of childish love had reached his son where all modern medicine had failed. He held the girl's small hands in his, trying to find words for a situation he didn't understand. "You didn't do anything wrong, sweetheart. Sometimes the machines beep for various reasons. The doctors will take care of Ethan." The minutes dragged on like hours as they waited in the hallway. Emily had been called and was now beside them, a protective arm around her daughter's shoulders. Andrew paced back and forth, occasionally stopping to press his ear against the door, trying to catch any information about what was happening inside. The alarms had ceased, replaced by an even more distressing silence. When the door finally opened, the doctor's face was an unreadable mask of professionalism, revealing neither good nor bad news. "Mr. Mitchell, we need to talk about what just happened with your son." Andrew followed the doctor to the small conference room, his body rigid with tension. Upon entering, he immediately noticed the different gleam in the specialist's eyes, a spark he hadn't seen in 8 long months of grim diagnoses and contained hopes. The doctor pointed to the images on the computer screen, colorful graphs showing Ethan's brain activity. "Mr. Mitchell, what we just witnessed is extraordinary. Your son showed a pattern of brain activity we haven't seen since the accident." At the exact moment Autumn placed the toy in his hand, there was a significant neurological response in several brain areas. Andrew needed to lean on the table to avoid falling, his legs suddenly unable to support the weight of hope growing in his chest. He looked at the images, trying to comprehend the meaning of those colorful patterns that to him were just meaningless blotches, but to the doctor represented the first concrete proof that Ethan might be coming back. "Does this mean he's waking up? My son is coming back?" The doctor adjusted his glasses, his face now allowing itself to show a cautious but genuine smile. He pointed to specific areas of the scan, explaining in simple terms what they were seeing: activity in regions responsible for hearing, emotional processing, memory. It wasn't just a reflex or random response. There was a pattern consistent with someone who is consciously processing external stimuli. I can't make definitive promises, but these are the first real evidences that your son may be emerging from the coma. Something about the contact with Autumn, especially with that specific object, provoked a response we haven't been able to obtain with any of our treatments. Andrew returned to the hallway like a transformed man, his posture previously bent by the weight of uncertainty, now lifted by the first spark of concrete hope. Seeing Autumn and Emily anxiously waiting, he couldn't contain the tears he had repressed in front of the doctor. He knelt again before the girl, this time taking her small hands with almost sacred reverence. "Autumn, you did something wonderful. The doctors say Ethan responded to your angel. He might be starting to wake up thanks to you." The following days passed in an atmosphere of contained expectation. The medical team developed a new treatment protocol, incorporating Autumn's presence in structured daily sessions. The girl would sit beside Ethan's bed telling stories, singing children's songs, always with the small plush angel positioned in the boy's hand. Andrew watched in amazement as Autumn, so small and recently recovered from her own ordeal, seriously took on the mission of bringing his son back. "You need to come back, Ethan. Your father is waiting for you. And I really want to be your real friend too." 1 week after the first episode, during a particularly lively session where Autumn was reading a story about dragons and knights, what everyone had been anxiously waiting for happened. Ethan moved his fingers. Not an involuntary spasm, as the doctors had warned might happen, but a deliberate movement, squeezing the little plush angel. Autumn stopped reading, her wide eyes fixed on the hand that had moved. "He squeezed my little angel. He's hearing me, Mr. Andrew." The doctors confirmed what childlike intuition had already perceived. Ethan was consciously responding to stimuli. His tests showed patterns increasingly consistent with an emerging state of consciousness. From that day on, progress, although slow, became constant. First the finger movements, then subtle facial expressions, and finally, 10 days after the first sign, the moment Andrew would never forget, Ethan opened his eyes. "Dad." It was just a hoarse whisper after months of silence, but to Andrew it sounded like the most beautiful symphony in the world. His son was back, looking directly at him with clear recognition in his eyes. Doctors rushed to make assessments, but Andrew could only hold his son's hand, unable to let go, as if fearing that this miracle might unravel if he lost physical contact. "I'm here, Ethan. I've been here the whole time, waiting for you." Ethan's recovery surprised the entire medical team in the weeks that followed. What would normally take months of slow progress happened with extraordinary speed. It was as if, once the barrier of consciousness was broken, he was determined to quickly make up for lost time. Intensive physiotherapy, which Andrew ensured was of the highest quality, helped restore muscle strength weakened by prolonged immobility. Cognitive functions, which doctors feared had been permanently damaged, proved remarkably preserved. I've never seen anything like this in my entire career. It's as if he had just been sleeping, not in a deep coma for 8 months. Autumn became a constant presence during the recovery, visiting Ethan daily, bringing drawings, telling stories about the twins, and about life in Andrew's mansion. A pure and genuine friendship blossomed between the children, as if they had known each other for years, not just a few weeks. Ethan, still fragile but recovering each day, eagerly awaited Autumn's visits, his face lighting up when he saw her enter the room. "Tell me more about the babies. Can they say anything yet? I can't wait to really meet them." Emily, observing the miraculous transformation in all those lives, including her own, frequently expressed her gratitude to Andrew in private conversations. From a single mother struggling to survive on the streets with 3 children, she had transformed into a woman with purpose and hope, beginning to work part-time in the administrative department of one of Andrew's companies, while continuing her own recovery. "When I think about where we would be if you hadn't stopped that night, there are no words to thank you enough." 2 months after Ethan's awakening, the big day finally arrived. With the enthusiastic blessing of the medical team, Ethan was discharged from the hospital. Dressed in new clothes, sitting in a wheelchair used more as a medical precaution than out of real necessity, he looked like another boy compared to that motionless body that had inhabited that room for so long. Andrew had prepared a surprise. Not only were Autumn and Emily waiting at the hospital entrance, but all the mansion staff with balloons, posters, and a small children's choir from the school where Ethan had studied before the accident. "Welcome back, champion. We've all been waiting for you." The arrival at the mansion was an even bigger celebration. A huge banner with the words, "Welcome home, Ethan," stretched across the main entrance. The interior of the house, previously decorated with the sobriety that reflected Andrew's silent mourning, now displayed vibrant colors, fresh flowers, and new photographs, not just of Ethan, but also of Autumn, Emily, and the twins, forming a visual mosaic of the new family that had formed in such unexpected ways. Our house finally feels like a real home, with people, with life, with love. Days turned into weeks, and the mansion that once echoed with the silence of absence now overflowed with sounds of life. Children's laughter, animated conversations during meals, music coming from the piano that Ethan had started playing again, still with some difficulty but with growing enthusiasm. Autumn, who had never had the opportunity to study formally, now attended classes with a private tutor alongside Ethan, both sharing the excitement of learning and discovering the world together. "Did you know that stars are like our sun, only much farther away? One day I want to be an astronomer and discover new planets." On a particularly beautiful afternoon, 3 months after Ethan's return home, Andrew observed the children playing in the garden from the terrace. Ethan, physically fully recovered, was running with Autumn in a lively game of tag, while the twins, now taking their first steps, tried to keep up with them on wobbly legs. Emily approached silently, bringing 2 cups of coffee. She handed one to Andrew and stood beside him, sharing the moment of peaceful contemplation. "Sometimes I still find myself thinking this is all a dream too good to be true. Of all the squares in all the cities on that stormy night, you just happened to pass by ours." Andrew smiled, remembering the unlikely chain of coincidences, or was it destiny, that had united them. If he had decided to go home by another route, if he hadn't looked at the square at that exact moment, if he hadn't stopped the car. So many small moments of decision that could have completely altered the course of their lives. And then he thought of the small plush angel, now shared between Ethan and Autumn, passing from one child to another like a talisman of protection and love. Perhaps there are no coincidences, Emily. Perhaps we are all part of something greater that we cannot fully understand. Ethan's complete recovery was officially celebrated with a big party in the mansion's garden. Friends, doctors, nurses, all who had participated in that extraordinary journey, gathered to celebrate what many openly called a miracle. At the center of it all, Ethan and Autumn ran and played as if there had never been illness or suffering in their lives. The plush angel occupied a place of honor on a small table, specially decorated for the occasion, a tangible symbol of the inexplicable bond that had united 2 previously stranger families. Miracles happen all around us every day. We just need to have eyes to see them and open hearts to receive them. As the sun set on that perfect day, casting golden hues over the garden filled with laughter and music, Andrew finally felt something he had forgotten was possible, complete and unreserved happiness. Watching the children playing, Emily chatting animatedly with the guests, the twins peacefully asleep on a large blanket spread on the grass, he knew he had found much more than he expected on that stormy night. Not only had his son returned, but an entire family had formed, filling the empty spaces of his life with love, purpose, and renewed hope. Sometimes, the greatest blessings come disguised as our greatest challenges. And sometimes guardian angels appear exactly when we need them most. The adaptation to the new life proceeded with a naturalness that surprised everyone. A comforting routine was established in the mansion, creating a structure that especially benefited the children. Mornings began with a lively breakfast, everyone gathered at the large dining room table that for years had served only Andrew alone. Ethan and Autumn attended classes together in the mansion's library, transformed into a cozy study room, with a private tutor that Andrew had hired. The twins, now almost a year old, charmed everyone with their smiles and first words, growing strong and healthy under the loving care of their mother and the staff that Andrew had hired to assist her. I never thought this house could contain so much happiness. For years, each room only reminded me of what I had lost. The afternoons were usually dedicated to Ethan's physical therapy, which continued to strengthen muscles weakened by months of immobility. Autumn faithfully accompanied him, transforming the exercises into games and challenges that made recovery less monotonous. The doctors, who continued to follow the case with professional and personal interest, marveled at the speed of recovery. The chief neurologist confided to Andrew that in his 30 years of career he had never witnessed such a rapid and complete rehabilitation after such a prolonged coma. "Medicine explains part of what we're seeing, Mr. Mitchell. But there's something else happening here, something that transcends our books and studies." Emily, for her part, flourished in her new life with a dignity that impressed everyone. She never passively accepted Andrew's generosity, insisting on contributing in some way. She began working part-time in the administrative department of one of his companies, showing an intelligence and dedication that soon led her to a position of greater responsibility. In the evenings after work, she devoted herself to online courses, determined to recover the years of formal education that hard life on the streets had denied her. Andrew, observing her determination, offered her the opportunity to pursue a university degree, which she accepted with tears in her eyes. "You didn't just save our lives that night, Andrew. You gave us back our dreams, our dignity, our future." The most remarkable transformation, however, occurred in Andrew himself. The ruthless businessman, known in financial circles for his calculating coldness and unwavering determination, gave way to a more reflective and present man. He drastically reduced his workload, delegating responsibilities to spend more time at home. His priorities changed so fundamentally that his oldest associates barely recognized him. When questioned about this change during a rare appearance at a business meeting, his response was simple and direct. "I discovered that building a family is much more challenging and rewarding than building an empire." As the months passed, the extraordinary story of Ethan's recovery and the providential rescue of Autumn and her family began to attract attention beyond medical circles. Journalists attempted to make contact, wanting to write about the miracle of the coma boy. Andrew protected the children's privacy with fierce determination, refusing all interview requests and keeping discreet security guards at the mansion gates to ward off more persistent reporters. His absolute priority was to ensure that Ethan and Autumn could live their childhoods away from the media spotlight and public curiosity that would certainly transform them into attractions. They are children, not stories to entertain the public. What we experience belongs only to us. However, Andrew understood that their experience could generate something positive for other families facing similar situations. After long conversations with Emily and consultations with public health experts, he decided to channel a significant portion of his fortune into a new venture. Thus was born the Guardian Angel Foundation, dedicated simultaneously to advanced research on coma states and comprehensive support for homeless families with sick children. The choice of name, suggested by Autumn during a family dinner, was unanimously approved by everyone. "If I can use my resources to prevent other families from going through what we went through, then our ordeal will have served a greater purpose." The project began modestly, with the acquisition of a building near the hospital where Ethan had been admitted. The space was completely renovated to house both neurological research laboratories and temporary apartments for low-income families with hospitalized children. Andrew hired the best architects to ensure the environment was welcoming and dignifying, refusing to create something that resembled an institutional shelter. Each apartment was designed as a true temporary home, with private rooms, equipped kitchens, and common spaces where families could share experiences and mutual support. When Emily and Autumn were sick, they had nowhere to go. No one should have to choose between being with a hospitalized child or seeking shelter for the rest of the family. The Foundation's research area quickly gained international prestige by bringing together neurologists, psychologists, and trauma recovery specialists from various countries. In parallel, the Foundation's social assistance program expanded rapidly, extending its services beyond accommodation. Vulnerable families received legal support to access government benefits, guidance for reintegration into the job market, and psychological counseling to deal with the trauma of illness and poverty. Inspired by Emily's determination, the Foundation created an educational program that allowed parents to continue their studies while their children received treatment, with scholarships for technical and university courses. 1 year after the foundation's inauguration, the family celebrated not only the project's success, but primarily the extraordinary journey that had united them. In the mansion that had once been silent, laughter and conversations now echoed. Ethan, completely recovered, divided his time between studies and helping Autumn take care of the twins, who were growing strong and healthy. Emily and Andrew, initially brought together by tragedy, discovered along the way a deep and unexpected love, formalizing their union in an intimate ceremony in the mansion's gardens. The small plush angel, catalyst for that entire miracle, occupied a place of honor in the living room, reminding everyone that sometimes life's greatest gifts emerge in the most difficult moments, and that the true miracle wasn't just Ethan's recovery, but the family that formed when destiny placed a millionaire and a girl with 2 babies who had fainted in the square on the same path on a stormy night. Did you like this story? Comment where you're from, subscribe to the channel, leave your like, and check out the next one waiting for you on screen. Don't forget to comment. I'll be waiting for you there.